Hello and welcome to Golden Geography. Today we're going to be looking at exploring oceans, part of the OCR Geography A-level specification. We're going to be focusing on key question 5, which is how have socio-economic and political factors influenced the use of oceans? Here we're looking at 3 key questions. 5A, oceans have been and continue to be vital elements in the process of globalization. 5B, oceans are important spaces where countries challenge each other. And 5C, oceans present hazardous obstacles to human activity. So we're going to start with 5A. Oceans have been and continue to be vital elements in the process of globalization. Just a little reminder that globalization is the interconnectedness of different parts of the world, and this can be facilitated through the exchange of culture or ideas or goods. And goods particularly rely on transportation. Smaller goods, lighter goods can be moved by air via aeroplanes, but larger, more bulky goods need to be transported by oceans. So our oceans have played a really important role in globalization. And as our means of transport over oceans has changed, from sailboats to steamships to modern day containers, that has changed not just the speed at which products can get from one side of the globe to the other, but also the amount of product. And containers and containerization has played a real key part in changing how our oceans play a part in globalization over the last 70 years or so. We can see here that they follow key or principal shipping routes across our oceans. And these shipping routes play a key part in that movement, that globalization of products. If we have a little look, particularly at the map on the left, we can see that there are proportional arrows or proportional lines. The thicker the line, the more goods, the more often that route is used. So particularly from America across the Pacific to Asia, and also between America and Europe are the 2 main transport routes. Those routes are dominated by the Northern Hemisphere. To be fair, there is more land mass in the Northern Hemisphere than the Southern, but there is a disproportionate amount in the Southern Hemisphere, and that could be to do with difference in levels of development and therefore finance and monetary availability to purchase products. But also there's a difference in the amount of trade that takes place. So here we have our key trading routes. If we're thinking about trading routes, then the shorter the route, the better, because it means that less money is spent in paying both wages and fuel costs to transport material. And as a part of that, often shipping canals have been constructed, and there are 2 main canals that really do make a difference. The purpose of shipping canals is to create shortcuts, to avoid lengthy detours, to make navigable links between areas, to provide potentially inland areas with access to the sea, particularly landlocked countries, but really to provide a better and more economical alternative route to more traditional routes. And a good example of this is the movement of products from Asia to Europe. Traditionally, products would have had to go all the way around the South African coastline and past parts of South Africa and then past parts of West Africa to Europe. This is a very long route. It would have taken 6 weeks or more. The development of the Suez Canal more than 100 years ago cut off that more dangerous, longer route past South Africa. It meant that ships could come up through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal, and that was often monitored, certainly funded, but also monitored by British interests, and therefore was deemed a safe route to get products through to Europe. The same with America. If you're looking at where the money is in America, particularly Canada and the USA, the economic giants here, and both of those have both an eastern and a western seaboard, and they want to get products from one side of the coast to the other via boats. Then traditionally they'd have to go all the way down past the southern tip of South America and back up. So the Panama Canal provides a much shorter, much more economic route to ship products around the world. And not just products, we could be talking about people, talk about cruise ships, port transport ships, but also naval presence as well, particularly for America. Getting its navy from one coast to another via the Panama Canal is a key advantage, making it cheaper and quicker. So when we're thinking about globalization and how particularly our oceans are used to transport products or people from one point to another, the faster you can do that, particularly through shipping routes and canals, the better. What that has meant is that we have had a change in some of the ways that we do shipping. And now the scale is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So if we go back 200 years, the boats that we had were much smaller. They would have held less cargo, less people. So you would need potentially more boats to transport product. Demand has grown, global population has grown, technological advancements, and particularly the use of containers has meant that actually boats can get bigger and bigger and bigger. And today we have some of these super containers that are starting to be used to move products from one point of the planet to another. And that means that actually not only can we get more economics out of this, scale helps, you're moving more products, it does mean there are some challenges. These boats are much bigger, therefore they are slower, they're more difficult to maneuver, and in some cases they are too deep for some of the existing channels that are used for shipping. So some ports are having to be dredged, some channels are having to be widened to enable these super container ships through. But it does mean also that their particular shipping routes are a little bit more limited, but are becoming more important because of the vast quantities of product that they move. Well, what is it that they are moving and where are they moving it to and from? It is easier to think about the top two images that we have here. We've got foods like bananas coming from more tropical climates. We've got posh cars coming from areas in the world where they've been manufactured products. These are very much coming from those areas of production via our oceans to areas of demand, to Europe, to North America. But those ships don't go back empty. We do tend to put both a lot of electrical waste, and that tends to head to West Africa, and a lot of our material waste, literally clothing that either is not bought or is sent to charity shops and not needed, is packaged up into these bundles, put on those containers and sent back to parts of Africa and Asia, where it is part of their economy, but it is also deemed as kind of Western dumping of unwanted products. So containers do not sail around the world empty. There is always something in them. And therefore we get slightly different types of trade depending on which direction those container ships are going and what they're moving. Are they moving new products into developed countries, or are they taking waste products away from developed countries? 5B, oceans are important spaces where countries challenge each other. Well, here we need to think a little bit about ownership and also the naval strongholds that we have on our planet. Now, bit of a word of warning. Obviously, there's not a huge amount of information about this. When we think about what is happening globally in terms of navies, the countries that own those navies do not want everyone to know where all their submarines are. There's a bit of geopolitics at play here. So we are going to think a little bit about America to start with. Obviously, there is a large naval presence within mainland America on both the west and east coast. These are well-known ports where you can see these ships quite clearly. There are obviously big naval ships, there are small ones, there are submarines, there are aircraft carriers, and there are bases. These are quite clear. Bases around the world are also quite clear, which we can see on the map just to the back. And you can see Europe and parts of Asia have American naval bases. Often these are with allied countries or areas of interest, particular trade routes, hence Mediterranean, that have got a key American presence in there for mainly protective reasons. However, there are a lot that is unknown and a lot that is changing. So as parts of the world develop, change, there may be changes in the naval presence and maybe growth of naval presence within those areas. So this is what little is known about the American Navy. In contrast, this is a prediction. This is looking at where China may develop future naval bases based on some of the economic activities that China's doing. And what's interesting is it's very different. Big presence in the Indian Ocean and off the western coast of Africa. And that's to do with China's investment in Africa, China's wanting to dominate those trade routes through the Indian Ocean, China's wanting to influence the kind of development schemes that are happening in Africa and how they're trading with different parts of Africa, their road and belt scheme. So this is predictions, but it is interesting that there is in some areas a little bit of overlap, but very clearly, just like America is trying to control and influence its key trading routes, so is this area. We also need to think a little bit about the use of oceans by countries trying to exert their influence, particularly in areas beyond their exclusive economic zones. So if we have a little look here, we have a map of the South China Sea. Now, if you follow the traditional exclusive economic zones guidance, then Vietnam and the Philippines and Brunei would have a significant influence over the South China Sea. But China rejects that. China wants to exert its influence over the South China Sea, as it is a key trade route. And what it is trying to do is to claim ownership of the South China Sea because of a more traditional, what they call the 9-line border. This ties back into Chinese history and empiricalism, but because of that historical claim, China wants to claim some of the areas within that. Particularly, it's looking at the Spratly and the Parcel Islands. And in order to dominate some of those areas, China has taken areas that were low-lying, under the ocean, coral-based, and have developed them into these islands. Sometimes there are people living there, sometimes they're just military bases, but by making it above sea level, these islands have been therefore included in the Chinese land, and their exclusive economic zones extended, which is how China is trying to claim ownership of the South China Sea. Controversial, of course, those other countries are not keen on that. 5C, oceans present hazardous obstacles to human activities. Well, pirates. Arrgh. Obviously, there's a history to piracy in the Caribbean Sea, and there's lots of Hollywood films based about that. But there is modern-day piracy as well, and where you tend to find piracy to coincide either with those transport routes where we started, looking at areas of Somalia and that route through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, or of areas which have high levels of income, so off the Nigerian coastline where there is oil. So piracy does happen, it does exist, but it's not just straightforward, oh look, let's attack that boat. There's many more socioeconomic things to consider. Most piracy tends to occur along the coastline of countries where there is political instability, lack of social opportunity, often there's hunger, there may be famine, there may be human rights abuse. There are reasons why people find that they have no other option but to turn to piracy, because it has and does offer much higher economic rewards than the more traditional occupations of those areas. So it's a difficult challenge. It's a challenge for those who are pirates, it's a challenge for those who are combating piracy, in terms of how to address some of those socioeconomic issues to try and reduce it is a big challenge, one that actually is not easily solved, even though some of these areas are quite heavily policed by naval presence. Migrancy is another key challenge, and there are two key areas that you can look at. Coming into Europe from North Africa is the one we're going to talk about, and you can see on the image on the left there's actually several routes. You can come from Tunisia across to Spain, you can come from Libya across to Italy, or you can come via Syria and Turkey through to Greece and through to Europe that way. These European migration routes does result in high numbers of migrants, high levels of migrants, of a whole mixture of ranges of economic, social, political migration. And what's difficult is the fact that because it's illegal migration, then that means that there are people smugglers involved, and boats are often overcrowded and very often sink as a result, and therefore people are relying on naval boats or coast guards to save them and rescue them as part of their entrance into Europe. There is other routes. If you are looking at Australia, to the north of Australia you have Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. There are people trying to cross that route into Australia too, and there are big challenges with entrance and the oceans and their migration routes there as well. Okay, so take a minute, have a look at these key bullet points, have a little think about what we've talked about and some of the key issues that have been raised here. There's no right or wrong answer. You need to be able to debate the different points, the different viewpoints, the different stakeholders that may be involved in each of these key areas. Green for I get it, amber for pretty sure but need a review, red for I just don't know, I better go back and have another look. Thank you very much.